Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Taikwan Conversations for May of 2023. And for the month of May, we're following something of a tradition now, which we started last year very happily in association with the French May, where we have a subject of heritage interest featuring experts from France, both online and here in the JC Cube with us. This series is part of the series of performances and events we have running here in Taikwan during the French May under the title of French Rendezvous in Taikwan. And the other program that is running throughout this week until next weekend is a really wonderful family-oriented entertainment in the parade ground featuring wonderful, super large puppets and enacting the fables of La Fontaine in a really beautiful family-oriented entertainment. So make sure you lock that one in your diary and catch one of the performances this week, daytime and evenings. It's our great pleasure to welcome three guest speakers from France, two of whom are joining us in the JC Cube tonight and one online. But before that, I'd like to welcome the French Consul General, Christine Druller, who will say a few words to introduce this evening's event.
So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. As Consul General of France in Hong Kong and Macau, it is a pleasure to be with you tonight here in Taikwan to shed light on the importance of heritage preservation in times of war. I would like to extend my gratitude to Taikwan for hosting this conference and for the commitment to promoting and preserving cultural heritage. A special word of thanks to our speakers tonight, Yves Ubelmann, Sylvain Roca, and Maxime Decaudin, who are here with us. Thank you for coming to Hong Kong, and Bastien Varoutsikos, who is joining us from France. Heritage is a reflection of our history and culture. It helps us understand who we are and gives us a sense of identity and continuity. When conflicts erupt, cultural property is often seen as a target by warring parties. The consequences of these destructions go far beyond the mere loss of buildings or artifacts. It endangers the preservation of our shared human history. The reason I'm here tonight is because France has taken significant steps to protect heritage in times of war. Besides its early commitment to the Hague Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the event of armed conflict in 1954, France has also been one of the first countries to contribute to the UNESCO Fund for the Protection of Cultural Property in Emergency Situations, which aims at preserving cultural sites in peril. I would like to take this opportunity to also mention the fantastic work being done by the International Alliance for the Protection of Heritage in Conflict Areas, ALIPH. France is proud to be a founding member of ALIPH and remains committed to supporting its work. The Alliance has been working tirelessly to support local actors to safeguard cultural heritage and to provide emergency aid to damaged sites. Today marks the 78th anniversary of the armistice between France and Germany on the 8th of May 1945. World War II ended for us, but left behind destruction which we thought should never happen again. Since more than a year now, war is unfortunately back in Europe with the Russian aggression on Ukraine. Beyond the human disaster, the heritage of Ukraine is suffering tremendously, and I would like to have a special thought for this country tonight in the hope that Russia will stop destroying what they claim to protect. We all have a responsibility to preserve cultural heritage in conflict-afflicted areas. We must ensure that historical sites, museums, libraries, and archives are protected against armed conflicts and that cultural property is not looted or destroyed. Together with partners like ALIPH, Tycoon, ICONEM, and Atelier Sylvain Roca, we can continue to protect and preserve our shared cultural heritage for the generations to come. So thank you very much to you all for coming tonight, and I wish you a lovely evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to mention, of course, that tonight's event could only take place with the support of the Hong Kong Jockey Club Charities Trust. Not only are they the underlying supporter of this part of the French May, but of course the Jockey Club has created Tycoon and continues to fund us to enable us to bring programs to you throughout the year. And we're tremendously grateful for their ongoing support. Now it gives me great pleasure to welcome online Dr. Bastien Varoutsikos, and here live with us in the JC Cube, Yves Ubelmann and Sylvain Roca, and our moderator this evening, Dr. Maxime Decaudin.
Hello. Thank you very much, Tim, for this kind introduction. We will have the three presentations from our three presenters. The first one will be Bastien Varoutsikos, who is cultural heritage expert and archaeologist with over 12 years of experience in implementing heritage projects in the Middle East, the Sahel, Central Asia. He received his PhD in anthropology from Harvard University in 2015. And he's currently the director for strategic development at the ALIPH Foundation, where he oversees the implementation of new work such as the intersection of climate change and cultural heritage. His activities have focused on scientific and cultural outreach, intangible heritage documentation methodology and ethics, and cultural project management. Across more than a dozen papers published in peer-reviewed journals and broad audience outlet, he explored the relationship between cultural heritage, politics, media, and new technology. Please join me in welcoming Bastien.
Thank you very much for the invitation to the Tycoon Foundation. It is a pleasure to almost be with you tonight. I'm sorry I will be missing out on the drinks and the immersive experience. I'm currently in Geneva and just back from Niger, which is related to the new mission of ALIPH that I will address in a minute. So I was asked tonight to talk about the work of ALIPH, but also how this integrates into the broader landscape of heritage initiatives. And what I think is interesting, especially considering the mention by the Consul Général of what we're celebrating today in France, is understanding that cultural heritage has always been one of the targets, right? One of the either destruction of byproducts of destruction of conflicts, but also a very specific target of said conflict for as long as we can remember. I was trying to make a comment about the most recent phases of conflicts that attack cultural heritage, ranging from Buddhas of Bamiyan to Palmyra in Syria to Mosul. And then as we keep going back, we go back to Bosnia, we go back to Algeria, we go back to World War II. So that basically history has been sort of extremely rich in events of cultural heritage destruction. We have learned a few things though, and we have developed over the years elements of legal framework, institutional frameworks that have allowed us to be more reactive to prevent some of those destructions or to act upon destruction in the way that will, preserve it as early as quickly as the conflict is started. So what today I'll try to do is go back to this recent phase, and so we're going to be talking a little bit about the Mosul Museum and this look at how this has shaped a landscape of initiative, how ALIPH has placed itself in this landscape of initiatives, and what are the ways forward. So what we've seen over the past 20 to 25 years is that there has been very progressively a consolidation of new methods, new techniques, new approaches, right? There's tremendous amounts of roadblocks when it comes to protecting cultural heritage in conflict. They're legal roadblocks, financial ones, strategic ones, logistical ones. Yves Ubelmann is going to talk about a lot of that later on, I'm sure. But I think this has really helped providing new entities over the course of the past 2 decades, and new laws, as well as like creating an incentive for a push to sign UNESCO conventions, for instance, and to implement some of them in some of the countries where we work. Because cultural heritage destruction is a matter of built heritage. It is a matter of movable heritage. So we're talking more about artifact collections, the ones found in museums, the ones found in archaeological sites. So that also connects to the entire question of trafficking of antiquity. So that's when heritage is a direct target. You also have when heritage situations where heritage becomes heritage destruction is a byproduct of the conflict, not necessarily carried out through very specific iconoclastic urges, but when conflict happens, especially in urban areas, cultural heritage destruction is going to happen. Built heritage, but also intangible cultural heritage, because when communities are at risk, when communities are torn apart, the practitioners of those practices, intangible practices, end up being spread across the country or moving to other countries, which is then destroying their ability to practice, their ability to teach to younger generations, and that is thus leading progressively to the destruction of those traditions. There's an example here that is coming from Ukraine, with destruction taking place around the site. Can we move on to the next slide, please? And that is an example of the Raqqa Museum, which took place in Syria. And then that is another example in which ICONEM was involved, which is this time more connected to another aspect of the crisis that ICONEM is looking into, which is climate change. So we'll go back to climate change a little bit later, as this has been sort of a crucial point of development for ALIPH's strategy. We're getting to a point where ALIPH is considering extending sort of beyond conflict into great crisis in general, because we understand the impact of climate change on communities and heritage environments. So we're not the first ones, right? I think what we've seen is that through Syria, Iraq, the Sahel, Afghanistan as well, progressively we've had several funds, Prince Claus Fund, the British Council of Cultural Heritage, Cultural Protection Fund. We've had specifically dedicated funds within the UNESCO, as well as a myriad of public and private initiatives progressively developing to act before the conflict, during the conflict, and after the conflict. ALIPH was seen as a necessity when thinking about how cultural heritage projects are being funded. For those of us who've been on the initiative side of things for the past few decades, identifying opportunities for funding which temporality was adapted to the needs of the project was actually quite difficult. There are emergency funds out there. Unlocking some of those funds could actually take up to 2, 3, 4, 7 months, when the need was actually 24 hours, 48 hours. So there was an issue with this. And then at the root of ALIPH was this idea that funding needed to be adapted to the specificity of the situation, to the temporality of conflict. So that in 2017, it was created in order to answer that need. It's a foundation that is international, that is a public and private partnership with 19 donors, or 25 donors, I think at this point, that really stand out of a desire from several countries, including France, the UAE, and then joined by Saudi Arabia, China, Luxembourg, Kuwait, etc., to provide a financing tool to address the specificity of conflicts. It is based in Geneva, where I am currently, but it has strong ties with a series of countries that are integrated in its foundation board. It is both a tool of funding, but also has a very proactive approach that we're still like pushing at the moment and developing further, in which we're attempting to find new ways to fight cultural heritage destruction. So at this point, well, depending on how we're counting, but we've implemented over 130 projects that is not including the action plan that was created in Ukraine, which I think integrates over 160, and dedicated to, so there's a map here that shows the presence of ALIPH projects, but it's not really representative necessarily of the proportions of project in areas. There is a tendency to work quite heavily in the Middle East, Central, and Central Asian region, and we're progressively developing our presence in the Sahel region as well. And that is mostly because, as I said, I think what we're trying to push is to think more generally about what crisis means for cultural heritage. So this approach attempts to be a holistic one, right? So it is an understanding that a cultural heritage project need to be mindful of the socioeconomic, cultural environment, of course, in which they operate. It is difficult to have a systematically holistic project, but what we try to do is that in countries or regions in which we work, we try to have projects that do represent every aspect of cultural heritage protection, from tangible and intangible cultural heritage, archive and manuscript protection, but also to address the impact of cultural heritage project as a tool for peace building, a tool for socioeconomic development. And we have several projects here represented that range from Sahel manuscripts to projects in Jordan that are supporting Syrian artisans, so that's providing income generating activities while maintaining, helping protect their craft and transmitting it to newer generations. We have more traditional built heritage project at the Tolobaskia in Gao, as well as in Sana'a in Yemen. So traditionally, right, the approach is to act before crisis, after crisis, and then as much as possible during crisis. So before crisis, we have several examples of work. In crisis here again, I will ask that you understand that in a broader sense, a broader definition of the term. We've had a series of capacity building projects in some countries, in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, as well as in DRC, to help museum staff develop strategies and skills that will allow them to protect museums and their collections in times of crisis that range from physical protection implementation to documentation and cataloging of their collection to restoration, sort of emergency restoration and conservation of some of the objects. Another example in which ICONEM was involved was the art of Ctesiphon in Takasra, which is an absolutely beautiful site south of Baghdad, which has been heavily restored over the past century, and which started crumbling. I believe that was about 2 to 3 years ago. ICONEM was actually sent there in order to carry out a 3D scan of the arch, which was then used to install the scaffoldings and then carry out sort of preliminary conservation and also assessment of the situation. That is an attempt at preventing sort of further destruction that is carried out before crisis can happen. During crisis, and there again, sort of going back to the question of what crisis means, there's an example from museum in Ukraine, an example from a site in Afghanistan, which is Shiwaki, in which thus sort of requires this ability to act in emergency in times of conflict or crisis, which does sort of, as a donor, is going to require very specific, almost administrative skills. So what we created within ALIPH are different pathways from problem to solution, from contact with potential operators to delivery of funding and projects. And I think this actually takes it's quite a large trial and error process, which requires a good amount of flexibility and agility, which has been developed over the past years at ALIPH. After crisis comes the work of documentation, rehabilitation, support of communities, projects that ALIPH have carried out in Syria, in Iraq. The work being carried out in Mosul has actually been one of the largest ALIPH projects. As it turns out, I believe it's tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, ALIPH and the World Monument Fund will launch at the Mosul Museum the official reconstruction of the museum, which is going to last a few years and is a fairly holistic approach to integrating local communities' agenda while providing a museum with modern standards that can host both the memory of the country, but also the memory of the destructive events. So which sort of takes us to where we are now, right? ALIPH has acted as a funder that adapts systematically to the needs of cultural heritage in crisis. This means being as reactive as possible. But then we started also realizing that to some extent, a general sort of usual call for project approach to cultural heritage protection as a donor would also create some biases, right? So that not everyone is able to integrate its project into the narrative of development funding. Not everyone can necessarily provide information that would be understood as being sufficient to carry out cultural heritage funding. So we started understanding that some countries were not being supported enough, some regions were not being supported enough, some themes were not being addressed enough. What ALIPH is doing now is, and it's been part of my role, is to have a more proactive approach to cultural heritage project funding. That is understanding why some areas are underrepresented. And that is going there and reaching out to local initiatives that did not know ALIPH existed. And it's reaching out to the government at the national and local level to better understand how their cultural heritage protection strategy is being planned and implemented and how we can support. We are attempting at adding some tools that can help us strengthen the rationale for project selection. Here is an example. I'm talking about Niger because we have two pictures here. I just came back from Niger because it is the first country that we're looking at with this approach. On the left side of the slide, we have Mohamed El Hassan Abambasho, who created his own association in the city of Agadez. As I mentioned, it was a project ICONEM was involved with, and has carried out both documentation of the heritage, built and intangible heritage, as well as restoration. It's the only project we're supporting in Niger. We realize there is a tremendous need in this area, and hence the reason why we visited it in the first place. So in the course of the past week, I met with about 25 to 30 different organizations, governmental representatives, to better understand the need at a local and national level and how this integrates within the broader Sahel needs as well, understanding the current threats and the risks, and taking notes, listening to what they had to say. Now back here, what I'm looking at is also how we can use some quantitative data to look at, to shape our strategy there. So here is just a short exercise I carried out using climatic data and an archaeological map, which is incomplete. I had to carry it myself. And just overlaying increase in number of heavy rain days, for instance, over the next 30 years, well, 7 years now, to also understand how this is going to impact different type of heritage in different environment. We can also look at conflict forecasting, for instance, to identify where conflict is going to take place in the next 6 months, the next year, the next 2 years, and maybe adapt our cultural heritage protection strategy to this, being one step ahead. And maybe and test, whether this works or not, and prepare communities better, prepare government better. So we're not going to be able to do everything, but what we're looking at here is basically start testing some of those approaches and supporting cultural heritage projects here connected to climate change impact at a coherent scale along a coherent narrative. And for this, we're going to be needing a lot of different colleagues, those who can go on the ground, or those who can help us shape those more quantitative methods. So thank you very much for this. I'm looking forward to the questions on the next presentation.
Our second presenter this evening is Yves Ubelmann. So Yves is the president and co-founder of ICONEM since 2013, and he specialized in digitization, 3D renderings of cultural heritage sites in danger. So ICONEM is, I guess you'll say more about it, but ICONEM is currently active in 40 countries to promote the conservation of cultural heritage threatened by looting, urbanization, mass tourism, armed conflicts, and climate change. His teams develop very large-scale digitized solutions for natural and cultural sites, allowing their recording at a very high resolution. ICONEM works with various government, museums, and international institutions such as UNESCO. Please join me in welcoming Yves.
Thank you. So thank you very much for having me here. I'm really happy to be with you in Hong Kong tonight. It was 15 years ago. I was an architect working with the French delegation, archaeological delegation in Afghanistan. And my job at this time was to study, to survey some sites in northern Afghanistan, in very remote places in the desert. And I have to identify these sites, this architectural structure, to see from which period of the story it comes from. So this is a picture showing, this landscape in northern Afghanistan. And by doing this job, by trying to identify these sites, we often faces this kind of situation. So this is a digging done by people from the area, just looking for cultural, archaeological artifact to be resold in the black market. And this phenomenon become very, very large on the region, everywhere. We could see, this kind of landscape. This is only, digging in large-scale sites. So, in front of this this spectacle, I really wanted to react or to do something about that. So, you can imagine that where you are facing sites like that, the different layers are completely mixed, and it's impossible for an archaeologist, to study this site. So this is the same site, Dilbarjin, in satellite imagery. So you can see the different digging. So it didn't affect, the general shape of the site, but you cannot just study the site anymore. And so the idea was to find another way to protect these sites that are remote, that even, the Afghan government couldn't at this time, protect. And it was I didn't know at this time that these sites, for example, the situation of this site will become even worse, because like 10 years after, we saw this. So you can see it's not only digging, but it's also like a mechanical machinery who started, to destroy the site. And recently, in 2021, we saw, this. And this is a complete destruction of the site, erase the site from the landscape. So at this time, we were not, imagining this situation, but we wanted to react and to do something anyway. And in those areas that now it's not accessible anymore for us, But we had this idea to use, digital technology at least to keep a memory of these sites, just images, 3D models that keep, at least the knowledge of this past. So we decided to use two different technologies. The first one was a drone. So it was the very beginning of the drone technology. You can see all the wires. We built, this drone ourselves, and with a camera. And the idea was with the drone, to like make a large scale scan. To scan like a whole landscape by taking, picture with a specific pattern. And with a second technology called the photogrammetry, we can, stitch all the picture to recreate in 3D like a digital twin of the sites. So this is another site in Afghanistan, south of Kabul. So we did there, it was in 2010, the very first mission we did, like more than 2,000 pictures from the air, from the drone, but also from the ground. And when we stitch all the pictures together, you're able to recreate, the site digitally. Not only the mountain, the landscape, but also all the details that are very relevant for the archaeologists. So we started not only to build like images of the site, but also a real database with a lot of information at different scale. And this is an example of the data we use. It's called a points cloud. So it's billions of points in the space that recreate, the shape and the color and what you can see on the site. And this is becoming really an important resource of knowledge from sites that are not accessible anymore. And this is an example of Mesainak, is a site of south of Kabul that nobody can access today. But there is still some teams, some scientists who are still working on it through, this model. So the idea was then to really build like a depository of remote sites from all over the world, threatened sites, to help scientific community to still working on this history. Because for Afghanistan, but also for Syria, for Iraq, you can imagine that the past is really, really important. Especially when you are in crisis, it's really important to have a better understanding of your roots and to help, to build, the future. So we decided to apply this not only in Afghanistan, but also in the main sites all over the world at risk. And so in Libya, in Syria, in Iraq, in Pakistan. And so I won't, show many examples, but just, for example, this one, you may record that in 2015, Islamic State started, a massive destruction of the monument in the site of Palmyra in Syria. So we decided also to help Syrian archaeologists and to go to the site really few weeks after the end of the battles to be able to document every destruction of this site. So just some few pictures. Here, this is the museum. So when we enter the museum, it was a real mess with all the artifacts on the ground. This is Roman sculpture that were laying on the ground. So our goal on every artifact was destroy, the head of the sculpture systematically broken, and even laying on the ground, some pieces of this head. So our goal is to make like a crime scene reconstruction with the 3D model, to understand how the site was destructed, why it was destructed, and to be able also to track the pieces, the missing pieces inside the different rooms. So this technology became also a way to document the contemporary story about the destruction itself of cultural heritage. We did the same with the monument. This is the Temple of Bel, the main temple of Palmyra, again completely blasted and destroyed by Islamic State. And this is a 3D model, the 3D copy, you can manipulate back, in our office to see all the detail of the stone. But we face again a problem when you arrive too late, when the monument is destroyed. How can you recreate, the past state of the monument? So we worked a lot with our engineers. So now we are a team of 20 people based in Paris, both engineers but also artists working together to develop, this kind of technology. So the idea was to take. So this is the destruction maps of this temple, and the idea was to take archive, and with the same technique, with the same processing program, we were able, to process this old picture from 1930, for example, to recreate in 3D the missing monument. This is a Temple of Bel before the destruction, recreate in 3D thanks to those archive picture. And then after, in the 3D space, in the virtual space, you can overlap, the different state. So in white is the site as it is before, after the destruction, as it is now, after the destruction, and in red it's the temple just before the destruction. So you can study really with a lot of accuracy, the disposition of the stone, on how the stone fell down, on how maybe we can rebuild, this temple, thanks to all this documentation. And the same we did with the Arch of Palmyra. So you can stone by stone, digitally rebuild the arch. And this is useful not only, like a theoretical exercise, but it's also really important for the architect who will be in charge in the future, to rebuild this monument, to see if it's possible, if it's difficult, and what can be done in terms of restoration. So behind there is a whole database with all the different stones that can be studied by all the dimension and this. And we did, the digitizing of all the different monuments of Palmyra, when we were there just after, the end of the battles. It was still the war in Syria. And what we didn't know is that, like 6 months later, Islamic State came back to destroy again some monuments. So this is, for example, the theater before the second destruction of Palmyra. So we did the 3D model, and this is the same theater after, when we come back again after 1 year. So this shows the importance of, coming as soon as possible to those places to be able to document. And because we never know what will happen in the future in this kind of situation. So the fact that we keep, all this information, that we are able to store it and to share it to the scientific community, something really, really important. And this is another example in a large scale places. This is Aleppo, again in Syria. And again, just after the end of the Battle of Aleppo, we came with a drone, with all the cameras to make like this urban digitizing of the whole ancient city. So the footage of the drone show, how violent was the destruction of the city. And when we came inside, to the souk, this is the souk of Aleppo, we saw, all the different military installation still there, and so the idea was again to document and to make like a 3D model of all this area. So this is the result, part of the result of the 3D model we did. So we did like kilometers of tunnels in the souks. To just after the burning of these souks, again to help the restorator. So this is a section of the 3D model you saw. that was used by the architect who were in charge to rebuild, you know, this monument. And this is so again we were looking for, you know, old picture, old documentation before the war. And the thing is, we found a French photographer, Yann Arthus Bertrand, who did, you know, with an helicopter, just photography of the site. So we took all his photography, and we did, you know, the 3D model you can see here. So this is the Aleppo citadel before the war, and this is after the war. So you can see, for example, the northern area is completely destroyed in the last picture. So you can again overlap, you know, different states. And you may heard about, you know, the earthquake in Aleppo in February. And so our idea were to come back as soon as possible after the earthquake, and it's exactly what we did. And it was sad to see, because this picture were taken in March this year. So we were on the field with our team to document, you know, the impact of the earthquake to this structure. And the problem with Aleppo, the country is so poor that they cannot manage, you know, to rebuild or even to consolidate, you know, this monument after the war. So a lot of old houses, you know, were staying, you know, like in disorder after the war. So many houses completely collapsed during this earthquake, and it's exactly what we saw, you know, last 2 months ago. So this again tells us something really important. We have to act, you know, as soon as possible, because a lot of new situation can come and destroy again. And I think in February we lost a lot of monument of houses in old Aleppo, maybe more than, you know, during the war, because of this. This is an example of a tower of the city wall of Aleppo that is completely destroyed. So I have many examples like that, so I will be quick. This is in Iraq. So the idea was, you know, during the war to bring a very specific drone to be able, you know, to survey Mosul. Mosul at this time was the capital of Islamic State, so it wasn't possible for us to go there. So that's why we asked the Peshmerga, the Kurdish soldier, to bring us really to the front line. So we were able to launch the drone, and then when the drone come back, like 2 hours later, it come back with all the picture of Mosul. And the good thing is, indeed, it was the last documentation we have of you know, the historical center of Mosul before the attack, before the bombing, you know, to fight against Islamic State. So we have all the all the detail of the old houses that are now destroyed, and this is a more recent picture. So this is also the landscape as it is today in Mosul. For now, UNESCO are restoring, you know, this mosque. This was a project we did in partnership with UNESCO, and this is the kilometers of points cloud of model we have, you know, so there is a lot of possibility to do cartography, to do analysis, but all the work we are doing are rooted in a local community development, and we really work, you know, with a local expert to train, you know, those people, to make them available, you know, to do by themselves, you know, this kind of documentation. And the large project we are doing is also about that, you know, create a new generation of people, of experts, you know, in charge to do. This is in Lebanon after the blast in the port. This is in Libya, and we have a lot of now of experts working with this technique now in many countries. And this is a project also we did with the Ministry of Culture in Ukraine to scan, with different company, Skyron here, different monuments. So now we are active in more than 40 countries over the world, often working with ALIPH, often working with UNESCO to be able to build, this digital depository of cultural heritage. And this is a platform we've built with all the sites we have to make an easy access to the scientific community. So it's work. This is another threat. This is Venice, so it's more about global warming and. But just to let you see how it works, you have a map. You click on the site, and then after you can zoom in, zoom out, and dive, into this complex data. This is more than 10 billion points that recreate, the whole city of Venice to keep, the record of it now. And it's a tool you can make some measurement and all the things. So just to make like a link with Sylvain. So during this last 10 years, we built a huge depository of sites from all over the world, and we just realized that as it is very accurate in terms of its photorealistic representation of sites, we were able to use the same data to make films for the public and to use it as a base to tell stories about these sites. And with the technology of 3D, with the effect, we can relight the scene, we can create some digital effect to tell a story. So this is an example in Saudi Arabia, for example. This is Alula, where we want, to tell to the public, the story of this site. So images is really powerful also to engage people in the preservation of cultural heritage, and the same raw material can be used both by scientific, by experts from all over the world, but also is a very good tool for the public to help people to have a better understanding of this site. So you can insert animals, people. And you can also go back in time, working with archaeologists. You get a lot of information, from the excavation, to be able, to rebuild some disappeared cities. And this is an example just from some excavation. We were able, working with the archaeological team, to recreate, the landscape, the urban landscape of these villages, using all, the artifacts, the tissues, and all the clue you have from this excavation. So now I will do the transition with Sylvain. We met at the beginning, thinking about, how to use this data to create real experience for the public, not only images but also experience.
Thank you very much, Yves. So our last speaker, so I guess the sequence you have starting to understand, from the funding to the savior to how to apply all this documentation that Yves has been collecting. We have Sylvain Roca. He's the founder of Atelier Sylvain Roca, who's a mobile studio founded in Paris 20 years ago, which is based on research, creation, and global encounters. The scenography, so the studio designs scenography workshops with architectural arrangements for temporary and permanent exhibitions in France and around the world, notably at the Musée d'Orsay, the Grand Palais in Paris, the State Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, and the British Museum in London, the Heritage Museum in Hong Kong. Sylvain Roca is a scenographer and interior designer trained in applied arts in Paris, Montreal, and Tokyo. And his studio brings together independent talents from multiple background experiences and generation. Please join me in welcoming Sylvain.
The precise thematic today is about heritage at risk, especially during war times, and that was the context in which we met, ICONEM and I and my atelier. It was in 2016, when Islamic State was crazy rising, and we met through a project which was commissioned from the presidency of France, François Hollande. And they had bid a tender to design the project, and we started working together. And that's really a funding project for both of us, I think, because it was your first large exhibition. And it was almost the first time also I was designing an exhibition including high-level data, digital data. So, and since then, before going through the projects, we had the chance to collaborate on several projects. And that's very interesting because you know that immersive experience exhibitions are exploding all around the world. Sometimes relevant, sometimes not really relevant. And we think that heritage, especially when you can't access to it anymore, including when it is under war, immersive or experience exhibition are really a very good media to make the people discover the sites they couldn't access anymore, which was destroyed, which is at risk, and to really the purpose of such exhibitions is mostly to make people concerned and engage into the idea of world heritage and maybe the protection. We never know. And so we always work with different layers and with a full integrated approach, meaning those kind of projects are really successful and powerful when all the actors of the projects were together since the very beginning of the idea of the projects. So that's something very specific in our opinion to this kind of project. The curator, the director sometimes, the content editor and surveyor, the designer, the sound creator are around the table at the very beginning because it's not a classical step to go through like a classic art exhibition, for example. Because the curator is still the curator, but it is not less used to this kind of tools. And also, you can't just play an image in the space like this giant. You can, but it's not interesting enough. It's not teaching enough, and it's not surprising enough. So when you work all together since the very beginning, it really can create very rich approach with different layers of understanding, different layers of emotions. And the fact we understood that the emotion is the first level, of course, for everyone, and we are working a lot of it with large-scale installations, and then the visitors usually get more focused and more interested into discovering informations, understanding more. And so you can see on those photos, I like to put public photos because on the exhibitions where we've been working on together, they are really focused. They are very silent, which was sometimes strange because there are 400 people in the same room, and they stay very long always. They see again and again, so they go deeply emotionally into the topic. And it's really, and some people cry when they go out, not because only it's sad, but because it's a powerful experience and a complete experience. So we try not to stay at the surface of the things, all the team, but to make the people go progressively deeper into the topic through emotions at the very beginning. So I will show 3 examples of projects we have been developing together. So the first one is the one I was talking about when we met, commissioned by the presidency, which happened first in Paris and then 2 years later in Rabat, in Morocco. And yeah, and so it was about 4 archaeological sites in danger at that moment, not only because of war, but also because of erosion, looting. And it was very powerful, this exhibition, because that was the first time also we had, as an introduction, the bombing, the explosion of the Bamiyan Buddhas, film with the phone. We all remember this short movie. And that was the first time that Islamic State was communicating large scale and documenting their own destruction. So that was a very powerful exhibition and very successful too. And so we started imagining different types of architectures, and you will see through the example, it's always a different approach. And that's very interesting because regarding this thematic and regarding the crazy development of immersive experiences, we really want to stick to scientific immersive exhibitions, so emotions and knowledge. So that's really something which is very important to us, very relevant also. And with this topic, it's not a nonsense to stay at the surface of things, but to go deeper and deeper and make people engage. So I don't know if I will comment on the pictures because I put a lot, so you can immerse yourself in the exhibitions. So that's a view just before you see. It's like this, yeah. We always try to have different parts. So introduction, which is very important with immersive exhibitions or experience because you come from the city or from a building and you enter a different world. So there is always a preparatory part explaining the main lines. And then emotional experience that mix, in this case, digital and real artifacts from the Louvre. And more detailed scientific area where you can go deeper after emotion. So here we are in the introduction, and it's always very, in this kind of topics, very useful to have a world map, for example, with all the sites threatened in World Heritage. And then you will enter the immersive space. So that exhibition is a bit specific because really we had 4 objects, 1 per archaeological site. And at the very beginning of the project, there were like 80 objects, and Le Louvre and Grand Palais really were very engaged and tried to be more and more powerful. So at the end, we had 4 objects in the exhibition, 12 minutes program, and people were staying 1 hour, 1 hour and a half, because it was really stunning, beautiful. And yeah, this is also something important. In this exhibition, it was not only about destruction, but also the brief was to love those sites as they were before, the explosions. And after, we will talk about the different threats around this heritage. So it was also to make people love the heritage, basically, which is, in my opinion, a nice approach to engage personal commitment in those sites. So and every time you will see, we try to create a scenographic landscape, which is relevant, very minimalist. So it's not intrusive, but it makes sense, and also it makes the people working in the space to discover the information. So that's also something very important for us. If you have to move your body to detect the content, then you are more accurate, obviously, than sitting in a chair. So that's really also always a landscape to explore, the exhibition itself. And the digital is part of the landscape, the scenography is part of the landscape, the objects are part of the landscape, and in some projects, the building itself, the room, is interesting enough to be part also of the narrative. So some general views of exhibition. So there were really a dialogue in between the artifacts and the digital environment, going from one side to another. And when the site of, for example, the Crac des Chevaliers was playing, the object was enlightened. So you understand that that object, it belongs to this site. And it can be their archives or a survey. That creation by ICONEM was mixing a lot of different sourcing. And of course, we try also when there are objects to magnify them, especially when you have 4 of them. So really to have a very good light, because also to have a good balance in between an object and a very bright environment, which is a large-scale movie. And also, so that was the last part, and it was very interesting also for ICONEM, because it was speaking about the different ways of surveying archaeology through time, from the very beginning of archaeology to ICONEM technologies. So that was in the center, the part of ICONEM represented by a drone and the augmented reality program. So the second exhibition we worked on was also about heritage, but also destroying. What does it mean, destroying a city? So it affects not only the heritage, but the people, the urbanism. So that exhibition was conceived like a city. You can feel a bit a Medina feeling. So people were going from street to places to enter a house and everything. So also this large layer of scales for different level of topics is very useful for the visitors to be dynamic in their visit and to be more accurate and concerned. A map, always. And here we also try to create a dialogue in between different elements, meaning the site today, for example, the site as it was before, the site top view, so you understand how it's built, and basic information, and more people witness talking about this kind of topics. So not only heritage. And when you enter a house, that's to focus on a precise subject. So you go from inside to outside to inside. So sometimes also we mix with literature. So it was poetry about the sites. Witness. And of course, this kind of exhibition also, when they're a bit playful in a way, because you explore a space. The exhibition is a space you explore, so it works pretty well with young publics because they don't have to be static, they have to be dynamic, which is great for children or young teenagers. So it's also an approach, this kind of scenography to engage them also. That was our very last collaboration, which opened very recently, 4 weeks ago, in La Saline Royale, which is an amazing heritage site, World Heritage Site in France. So, our intervention was in that building. So that was a salt manufactory of 18th century. And the institution proposed ICONEM to imagine a space dedicated to World Heritage in a World Heritage site. So it was very meaningful, obviously. That's the room before the installation. That the installation, and you see again, you feel it will be long to explain, but there are different elements, different scales. So you can imagine different topics also about World Heritage, including built heritage and non-tangible heritage. So that's a very large-scale installation, obviously. That's more than 2,000 square meters and 18 meters height ceiling. So we imagine a space, again, with different layers vertically. A layer ground floor, a layer, very large layer up, and the building itself, which fully play a role in the experience and the exhibition. So different parts of thematic. So that installation plays movies about 8 remarkable heritage in the world from different periods, different cultures, obviously, and scattered in the world. So every hour you have one site which is played. And here you can see we mix also different technologies. Full digital is sometimes a bit tiring also for the eyes, so we try again to help visitors to focus, to stay focused. So we have digital print, which is also good not to have always enlightened backlit stuff because it's very tiring, and interactives. And they all play together again. That's a very integrated approach. All the projects we have been designing, imagining together is very integrated, and in general, it makes a very coherent proposal, which is very powerful in terms also of transmit knowledge. And this is also an interesting point. In this space, we had in the brief, and we wanted, obviously, to magnify the building when there is not the movie, and to focus on the movie, but still with the building a bit littered. So that's a transparent screen that we imagine not the material, but the configuration. So when you don't have the large movie, the light is behind the screen, so it becomes transparent. So you can enjoy fully the building when there is not the show, 8 minutes per hour. And you can still, of course, use the interactive programs and read the printed information. So that's a reversible space with interactive, very large-scale screens that are very successful with children, obviously. And there is a movie presenting the project. And now two different examples, which we think are interesting because it's a different kind of heritage, but which is still very relevant to show in a large-scale immersive experience. For tourism, for example, two other issues, Pompeii, we wanted to travel through time in real, in Pompeii, and to make the people understand how it was before the eruption, what happened, and how it is after the eruption. So immersive digital exhibition helps a lot. So it was in Le Grand Palais again, and in that case, for example, of course, the room, which is a very large scale, it's 16 meters high, we can't really see the scale there, is becoming part of the experience itself. So we created a street of Pompeii with a theater, the volcano in front of the theater, and you go in the street, go in the domus, go in the theater, so it's a very animated rhythm. That allow to scattered different levels of information again. So that's 3D of the full proposal. And in other projects, but this project especially, the image become architecture. So that's a very good example of integration of our different skills. It's not separated, it's totally merged. In between the architecture, the image, the content, the mediation, the curatorship, and in that case also real artifacts from Pompeii. And for example, here the shadows you see from Romans, they were moving, so you were in the middle of a Roman crowd. And we were mixing real artifacts, this amazing statue, for example, with the background it was before the destruction. And this is a short movie also presenting the concept. So yeah, every 25 minutes there was the eruption, and that this exhibition I like also because it was in between a real scientific exhibition, a classic scientific exhibition, and a kind of entertainment. And many families were coming from the little son to the grandfather, and really everybody has something to enjoy. So really like that approach also. And another example, which is again very different, Joconde. Obviously, okay, the piece of art is not in danger, really not, with the layers of security. But you can't have a personal dialogue with the art. It's 5 meters minimum. There are 200, 300 people around you. So it's a non-accessible art of piece of art, which is in the museum, but you can't really create a link with it. So it's relevant to have a full exhibition dedicated to one art piece, La Joconde, to create a relationship with it, understand it better, and play with it. And in that case, again, sorry, the building, of course, it was in Marseille, became part of the story because it's an amazing, beautiful place, a bit inspired by Italian Renaissance, so it was perfect. And we created, again, a full integrated scenographic environment with different levels of emotions, understanding, and thematic scattered in the space. And again, the people had to explore the space, to move, to go into details, to go back to large scale informations. Interactive also screens to go further and play with La Joconde also. And it was with the Louvre, so it was a very serious exhibition in the end. But the curator was really very clever, and he proposed to play with La Joconde because she was an icon always with who artists played a lot, so public also. That's a bit violent, but I shortened the movie. So yeah, the interesting stuff is to illustrate also through ICONEM projects who I collaborate, and other projects, the immersive experience and digital experience has to be really relevant for us to be and meaningful, to be powerful and fully integrated.
Thank you. Thank you very much to our 3 speakers tonight with very interesting kind of different set of the moment in which heritage is being, the decision making, the documentation, the engagement with the public. So a very wide range of different expertise and how they come into this process. So thank you very much for these fascinating talks. As a way to maybe tie a little bit all these presentations together, I was wondering if you could say briefly something about deciding choice and well, actually Bastien talked about biases in funding. And I guess for you, Yves, everything should be documented in a way. Like I understand also this could be, but I guess all of you at the different levels of the process in which you engage, and you talked about, having 40 objects and having to show 4 at the end or something like this. There's a process of selection. And this process of selection also reveals, priorities and urgencies in certain cases, but also maybe definitions of what is World Heritage, and also, I think from Bastien's perspective, maybe you can say more on that. what our common conception of heritage is and the priorities we have maybe subconsciously that we're not aware of, and that guides our decision making. So briefly, maybe each of you can say something about this process of selection making, or at the different levels in which you engage. Maybe Bastien, you would like to go first?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. So yeah, we mentioned, well, I mentioned, I started it, but the concept of biases, I think it's a question of hierarchization mostly, because I think we'd all like to fund everything. We'd all like to document everything. I mean, it's an incremental process, but it means that also funding, but also implementation are, finite resources, which means we have to change. And I think I only recently moved to the donor side of thing, and I think I might still be a little impacted by to be on the receiving end of the funding, but what the variables that impact what we select, what we choose to fund or not, I think are depending on, there's quite a lot of them, basically, to put it that way. And I think there are clear processes for decision making within ALIPH. Projects are prepared. Projects that we receive are processed by the Secretariat and the team here under the scientific supervision of the scientific director, Maya Kominko. They're then passed on to the scientific committee, which is composed of world-renowned experts who will provide, produce an opinion. And then eventually after that, they're selected by the foundation board. So there's very different layers, right, of decisions here. Trying to take a step back from this and not to get too granular. I mean, clearly, the reason why we choose some projects sometimes are connected to, well, first, ALIPH has status, its status that are very clear. They're evolving, but they're very clear. So for a long time, it was mostly focusing on built heritage, in conflict areas exclusively. So it means that any intangible heritage project at risk in an area that was not directly concerned by conflict would not necessarily be selected. They're still very important, but it would not necessarily be selected. So this is all evolving, and I think we'll need to ask ourselves as we're evolving and and accepting a broader and broader definition of what crisis means, or what cultural heritage means. Then it also means that we'll need to think about how we hierarchize those, right? I mean, clearly, sometimes the limitation doesn't come from ALIPH, it comes from the lack of operator. I mean, we're having issues finding operators in Yemen, for instance. It also comes sometimes from distanciation from the civil society, like in Niger. So then we go there. Basically, anytime we identify a bias, we identify a problem, we're trying to find a solution for it. But as with the operators, I mean, I think it's also a question of what's available, where can we work, and what are the things that we think we can take on versus things that would be more adapted for another kind of donor. So all of that is taken into consideration, and even for us in-house here, it's a sort of constantly evolving mechanism.
Yeah, thank you. The question of definition, I think, is also applies to you, but in a different way, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Because so this is very critical for us to put the energy in the right place, because we have not a lot of energy. We are a little team, and there is all over the world, problems happening every day, and we have a bias indeed due to also the communication. Due, for example, we are talking a lot about conflicts that are close from us, like Ukraine, but never about Yemen, for example. And I think the situation, for example, in Yemen for cultural heritage is tragic, but nobody cares. Also because it's difficult to go on the field. So we try to find different tools, to alert us, about the situation. And we recently worked a lot about, we have now the chance to have a very important satellite imagery coverage of all the planet, every week, every month. We have, all the world representation of the planet, so you can see, differences from one month to another. And we decided to develop a specific approach, taking in consideration, the global coverage and using database of sites, to check, the differences from, one month to another. And we are now thinking about, creating a non-profit organization dedicated to that, like an observatory, just in order to be able to highlight, based on this data, to highlight, the changes on the ground, specifically in cultural areas. And also, again, we are looking for differences, especially on UNESCO World Heritage Sites, for example. But as we saw, for example, in Afghanistan, there is a very dense network of middle important sites, but that are really important to understand the story of areas, many areas. And again, nobody cares about that. So our ambition now is to get, this database with a high coverage of sites from all over the world, and to be able, to monitor with the most recent imagery, changes. So this is a strategy, but I think we have to combine, different kind of strategies. A strategy that Bastien were talking about, and we have to put all our data, all our effort together, to be more accurate about, targeting the most important sites too. But this is a very important challenge for the following years.
Thank you. And Sylvain, was there any part of the...
Yeah, because making decisions is very important in designing such exhibition on such thematics, because we are facing it and we are discussing a lot about that with this kind of topic and this kind of experience. Again, if you want to have a very powerful, meaningful, rich experience for the public, every idea you have has to go through that question: what does it bring to the purpose? Because sometimes technology is just for technology and image is just for image, for the eye. So that's a very intense development process, really, with all of the members, again, working all together to really focus on the meaning of everything we do. And the more selective you are, and Athena site was a good example with the 4 objects in the end, the more powerful you are, the most powerful the experience, and the more the visitor will remember that experience and be engaged in some way. So this is really about decisions, very different ones from Bastien and Yves, but still it's necessary to be very selective.
Thank you very much. We still have a
Maxime,
little bit...
I'm sorry, if I could add something to this.
Yes, please do.
We're talking about hierarchization, and I think that's where the work that the three of us actually do sort of meet is this idea of how do we get what we do out there, right? How do we communicate about what we do in a way that people will understand? Because this question of hierarchization often comes up in times of crisis with what we call the people versus tone debate. What should we restore building when we have, people still like needing urgent help, for instance? And I think managing not only just to show pictures, but also just to create coherent, meaningful narrative for the public is crucial to get the public to understand that working on cultural heritage protection is working on the communities, is working on the sites around the communities inhabit and protect, And I think that is done through the narrative that Sylvain and Yves are building through their exhibitions, basically.
Yeah, thank you very much for this a good point at the end. We have a few minutes left. Maybe we can take one or two questions from the audience. Please let us know if your question is for the three speakers or in general or for a speaker in particular.
My question is dedicated to Yves. Yes, so given all the crises still ongoing, a lot of them are unsettled, there's a lot of uncertainty. So my question will be, how has the political unrest affected the rebuilding mission on the ground? And is there any negotiation process with the local governments to seek kind of consensus on the heritage protection? And how is that process going, or if there's any? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So I think it's, again, a very important question because it's the base of everything. And the first step is to be in contact with the local experts and the local communities because they know very well, you know, the condition of the heritage, the story of the heritage, and they have all the memory, you know, about those sites. So this is the first contact we've made everywhere, you know, with the archaeologists, with the architect in charge, you know, of the maintenance of these sites. And we try, so sometimes they are really aware about what we are doing and they are, you know, welcoming us very, very quickly and they are requesting to their government, you know, a way for us, you know, to come to some places are, you know, difficult to reach even for journalists. And so that's why it's under, you know, the demand of local specialists that we can access to those places. Sometimes they are not aware about this. Now it's becoming rare, but sometimes they are not aware, so we have to convince them that this methodology can help for the protection of cultural heritage. And so this is a work we are doing just before. Sometimes it takes time. So in the context of emergency, we have really to speed up and to make, you know, prepare everything after. And I think that the important thing is in this case to really to trust in the people who are working in the ground. And I can just tell you the example of Syria, and you know that the political context is very hard. Also conflict, economic situation is something like catastrophic. And thanks to few people who are really engaged, you know, in the protection of cultural heritage, we were able to really to achieve something huge without funding, because it's difficult in this case, you know, to find funding for Syria because nobody wants to fund, you know. Now it's kind of changing, but it's very slow. And so it's just a matter of human relationship you have with the people and really the trust you can build, you know, all together with the local communities.
Thinking of how technology changes so fast and the concerns with cloud storage problems, what is your long-term data management plan to make sure that your wonderful work is accessible in, say, 50 years from now?
I will take it because this is part of my expertise, and I think also a very important question because you can digitalize thousands of sites. If you lose, you know, your hard disk, you just lose your time. So we are working closely with very important company, GAFAM, who are today the only company who can provide trust in this field of long-term conservation, digital conservation. And we've built, you know, relationship with, in this case, with Microsoft for the platform we are building, but very closely with the engineer of the team of Microsoft to be sure that, you know, we can trust about a long-term maintenance. So this is the first the first strategy we have. But besides that, I think that we have to multiply the way we diffuse the data, not only from digital data on hard disk, but also publication, but also conferences. And also exhibition, I think, is part of this process. If you make, the exhibition we are working on, touch more than 100,000 of people, so they can discover very accurately, this site. So I think it's really also a way to transmit to the future generation, the knowledge of the site. So working in both sides, the technical sides with the best technology, to be sure that we won't erase everything in like 10 years, but also in a low-tech side, to be sure that all the different means of diffusion of this data will be complete. I don't know if you want to add something.
Yeah.
No. Okay.
The question is related basically to prevention of, let's say, discouraging the aggressors, because I think this is pretty much a common ground that wars and conflicts in majority of cases are about the lifestyle, the values. Well, at least in Ukraine, this is what is happening. So my question is, if there is some strategic initiative to promote the culture which is being destroyed, diluted, is there already some work in this direction to discourage? Because basically, if the culture which is supposed to be destroyed getting promoted, I think this will discourage the aggressor.
It depends of the context, but the problem is sometimes, cultural assets are targeted also by the conflict and to a way of destroying, a culture. So it's sometimes difficult to fight, this idea in some fighters, to erase the idea of erasing, the culture of the other part of. So there is a lot of communication, and I think in this field, ALIPH is doing a lot of things, and it's important, to bring also to a legal level, this problem. And we saw recently a first trial about Timbuktu, the destruction of mausoleum there with the international tribunal. And this, I think, was a very important step because for the first time, the international tribunal recognized that it is a crime, to destroy cultural assets. But there is a long way, still a long way to take because many times conflict is about fighting of culture, and I saw a lot of different conflict in different places in different countries, and every time you can see that there is the root of the misunderstanding is based on the willing of destroying, the idea or the culture of the other. So I think this is a very challenging question, and it means a lot of work, to respond to that.
Since you mentioned ALIPH, maybe Bastien has a word to say on that.
Cultural heritage can be harnessed for peace building or for conflict, right? I mean, it goes in every possible direction. We've clearly seen examples of reusing, rebuilding some sites, or adding elements, architectural elements, or that will allow a group or a nation to propose a completely different narrative for the evolution of a specific group in a given region, right? And I think to better protect heritage, we need to know what's out there, right? I think I'm a big proponent of documentation. I do think there's a great value to what ICONEM is attempting to do, which is getting unbiased quantitative data on the current state of cultural heritage, so that when conflict comes, when destruction comes, when attempts at transforming the role of this particular piece of heritage in a nationalist narrative, for instance, when that comes too, then we have the data to have the discussion, right? Then we know what was there before or what wasn't there before. And I think that that's the role of organizations and companies like ICONEM and others. That's the role of archaeologists, of researchers, right? And I think getting a better understanding of that and making this data available as much as possible, open access, I think is a kind of a first step to prevent the misuse of cultural heritage, right, in the construction of aggressive narrative. And I think in addition to that is just, and that's basically what ALIPH did in Ukraine, is just being there, right, providing as much training as possible. It's trusting the local operators to, handle the funding, to handle the equipment, and yeah, a lot of things are out of our hands. But I think, as Yves said, we can't really do anything if there's no trust with people on the ground.
Thank you very much for this. Please join me in thanking our three fantastic speakers for tonight. Thank you very much.